Hello guys, and welcome to a new Broken Arrow video today by me, Vulcan. In this video I'm going to be going through all of the helicopters available. This is going to be a sort of tutorial where I talk about what the helicopters do, what they're good for, and sort of my recommended loadout. So starting here with the KA-52 Alligator. It's a 170 point aircraft by default. It's a very tanky helicopter, and a lot of the Russian helicopters are very tanky, and the reason for that is because of the 30 armor, which is definitely on the top end. Then we've got 15 health. There's also, in this case, 25% ECM, which is just a flat chance for missiles to miss this helicopter, which is very handy, which is one reason why it can be very difficult to shoot these down sometimes. Now, the other thing to mention about helicopters straight off the bat is you can see here the KA-52 has 2,400 optics, which is very good, but that is purely for spotting ground targets. You'll notice that the low altitude range is actually 3,200 meters, and that's for spotting enemy helicopters. So that is definitely something to bear in mind when you're looking at optics versus things like the Silent Hawk or Comanche, which have stealth, which we'll get to later on. With the KA-52, very solid platform. By default, it comes with 40 rockets, and the 80mm S8 rockets are pretty decent, just for sort of killing infantry over time and also taking out light targets. The S13 can hit a little bit harder. It does have more damage. I think it also has slightly more range. Yeah, it's got 100 more meters of range on the S13 over the S8, so that can be handy in a pinch. The S13s are usually good for like hit and run, whereas the S8's usually just there as a supporting rocket for your other munitions, which in this case, moving on to the middle pylons, are the HGMs. So Vikir, Attacker, there's also more S8s and more S13s that you can have. Now, this would be a very strong rocket helicopter with 80 rockets for 195 points. It's very tanky, but there are better options for this that we'll get to later. So generally the way that I like to build the Alligator is just with the rockets on the inner pylons, usually the S8s, and then the Vikir. The Vikir is such a solid HGM because it kind of ripple fires. Now, a lot of people ask me what the difference is between the Vikir and the Attacker, and the only difference really is that the Vikir fires like just more frequently. So it doesn't wait for the first missile to hit before it fires a second, whereas the Attacker does, which is why it costs slightly less. Then we have the outer pylons, where you can just simply add anti-aircraft if you would like for an extra 50 points. In my opinion, I like to have helicopters that specialize in air-to-air warfare rather than just tacking on air-to-air onto my helicopters. So whilst this is a decent option, you only get 4 of them, and they are going to run out probably before they kill 1 or 2 helicopters. So yeah, even like 1 helicopter might be a struggle if you get unlucky. And so that's the reason that I would never commit to using such an expensive helicopter for air-to-air. So yeah, my recommended loadout for this would be S8 rockets with the Vikir ATGM. Overall, a very solid ATGM helicopter. Moving on, we have the Mi-24PN. This comes by default again with the 40 S8 rockets, and this is going to be something that we see quite a lot. The Mi-24PN only has 20 armor, down from 30, which the KA-52 has. But it can carry 8 soldiers, so you can use it to drop off something like a Spetsnaz crew even at the start of a game. It only comes with 10% ECM, but it's only 140 points, so it's quite a decent amount cheaper. Its main gun is actually really good. This thing just does not stop firing. Once it starts firing, it doesn't stop until it basically runs out of ammo. So it's really cool. It doesn't have a crazy amount of ammo, mind you, but it can be certainly effective for just ripping up some light targets and infantry. So in terms of options on this Mi-24, we've got the 40 rockets. There's the S13 rockets, again, a bit more hit and run. And then you've got the gun pods here for if you want to hover at close range. The one or best way I would say to use the gun pods is to just play at low altitude and kind of guide your helicopter around buildings and use them to just slam infantry. They're really good for that. And when you have a helicopter that's still quite tanky, they can be very, very effective at that, especially if you just add more rockets to them as well. So in this case, you can add another rocket pod on the port side pylon, or the S-13 rockets, and then you can, on the starboard pylon, actually add an 8 rack of Kokon AT missiles, a 4 rack, 20 more S-8 rockets, or 5 more S-13 rockets. I think a loadout that works something like this, where you have like gun pods and S-13s, would be a really interesting and fun way to use this. But in my opinion, just going for like a full S-8 rocket loadout for 160 points is absolutely fine as well. And they're going to unleash these rockets very quickly. They're not too much longer range than the gun on the front itself, so usually they're firing at the same time. And it's just a good anti-infantry, anti-light vehicle support helicopter, whilst you're potentially trying to drop in some troops with it at the same time. So in terms of the Kokon, I didn't really cover it, but it has 750 millimeters of explosive pen at 1,600 meters. It only has 10 damage, which is not ideal. I mean, the Vickers has 11, which isn't like that much more. So it's okay. It's just kind of lacking the range to really help you avoid anti-air. Because Stingers have 2,000 meter range, some of them have more. I think the STT variant has like 2,100. So when you're looking at like the range of an HGM, longer the better. Because even the Vickers is like 1,800, so you have to get within like 200 meters of a standard Stinger in order to fire it. And so yeah, the more time you spend within range of enemy AA, the less time you have to get out of there. And that's kind of an important thing to note. So then we have the Mi-26, the Korova or Cow. This is a funny one because for me, I've had a lot of interesting times using this aircraft to airdrop, sort of, I guess not airdrop, but airlift units to the sides of the map. So I've had a funny strategy with this lately where I'll fill it with like a couple of Screzets and a couple of infantry units and just drop them off at the side of the map and then like drive them to the enemy's helicopter spawn, for example. It's just really, really fun sort of way to flank. But otherwise, it is a decent cargo helicopter. It can bring in large supply dumps for the backline that you can then ferry to the front line using ground-based supply vehicles. But I would never recommend trying to land this on the front line because it's so slow and it takes ages to land. So if you fill it with 85 men and fly it to the front to try and reinforce, those 85 men are not going to make it, as the helicopter will most likely get shot down. Now, it does have a lot of health, so it can tank quite a few hits, but it's only 10 armor, so yeah, that's not ideal. Regardless, the best way to use this, generally just sort of troop transport into the back line, or maybe drop it on a flank because it's funny. Then we have the Mi-28, which is an interesting one. This is the Mi-28 NM. It's very tanky again, so 30 armor, 15 health, 15% ECM instead of the 25 that the Alligator has. So you can start to see that the Alligator is very, very good. But in this case, our default loadout is the S-13s, 130mm rockets with 6.5 damage at 1,300 meter range, and the Lemur. The Lemur is an interesting HGM because it is a top attack terminal guidance HGM. It can do a lot of damage to tanks, but it usually takes 2 hits to kill a tank. And it fires slowly. Like even if you rack like this with the Lemur, it doesn't increase the rate of fire as far as I'm aware. So you just have like 8 Lemurs and it fires one at a time. It waits for it to hit or not, and then it will fire another. And it just doesn't fire fast enough for it to be worth the points. So these are expensive missiles. You can see that they are 110 points on the inner pylons, 100 on the outer pylons. And so it just doesn't really make it worth it, in my opinion. The only real good thing that the Lemur is good for is killing sniper squads and like sort of high value but low man infantry. So like in terms of squads only having like 4 men or 5 man in a squad, then a Lemur can hit them really hard. And that's the one nice thing about the Lemur, is it can target infantry. It's not just there for targeting vehicles. So in terms of a loadout for this, I like to run it with rockets and the Lemur if I want it in an anti-infantry role. And then you obviously already have the 2400 optics there, which helps you spot those infantry units on the ground that you're going to be engaging. Whereas there are other options. If you stick to either the SA or S13 rockets, you can choose to make this a standard HGM platform with Vikirs. Again, those are the ones that fire nice and quick. And then the Igla S there. You've also got the 12 Vikir loadout, which is another nice loadout. You've got the Igla loadout, which is actually probably one of my favorites for the Mi-28s. And then more rockets. So you can make this a tanky rocket boy for 175 points. But yeah, my recommendation for the Mi-28, especially if you're using VDV, is I'll usually run this as the air-to-air helicopter, because it is very tanky in itself. It comes with 15% ECM, but the nice thing about the Mi-28 over the Alligator is you get 8 Igla S instead of just the 2 that you would get on the, or sorry, the 4 that you get on the Alligator. So you get like 4 Igla S, which would generally run out before you kill anything, and then this one gets 8, which is nice. So it makes a difference. And the great thing in general is you do have the extra optics on both this and the Alligator, so it is going to help you spot Comanches a little ways off, although the Comanche, in my experience, still manages to get the first shot off most of the time. So yeah, the Igla loadout is my recommendation. It is also good for using like the mixed loadout, I think, and you can use Lemurs as well. Although one thing I will say about the Lemur, this is another important point. If you mix Lemurs and ATGMs, the Lemur is fired before the Vikir, and until the Lemurs are out of ammo, the Vikir won't fire, at least from my experience. I don't know if that's like just me like having messed with it not enough, and that's just what I've seen, but I'm pretty sure that's the case, so be careful with that. Moving on, we have the Mi-35M, which by default comes with 3 rocket pods and the attacker. So this has the same stats as the Mi-24 PN in terms of ECM, health, armor. So you've got 10% ECM, 20 armor, 15 health. You've got the 8 seats there again, but you get a different gun. So this is a 900 meter gun instead of the 1000 meter gun. If you just compare these, you'll see the difference here. The one thing that the Mi-35 has is just like extra ammo generally. But you can see it has less ammo. It also has less penetration. But this does actually aim a lot quicker because you can see the way that it's on like a gimbal, as opposed to this being straight forwards on the side of the helicopter. So this one always has to face its target, whereas the Mi-35 doesn't, because it can just turn it to the side. So that is handy. In terms of loadout, there's quite a lot of options for the Mi-35. But yes, first of all, you get 60 rockets with the attacker. You can change the gun pods if you want, and there's S13 rockets in there. On the port side pylon, you can add air-to-air. You can have 4 or 2. I would always recommend 4. 2 is basically pointless. And then on the starboard side pylon, you can have ATGMs, so the attacker or like more attackers. 4 is usually fine for something like this, honestly. So it's really up to you whether or not you want to like do a mixed loadout where you have like the Igla and the attacker, or you just have like a rocket unit plus a few ATGMs for if you need to hit anything harder. You can also add an ECM system on this, which does improve its ECM to 25%, which is pretty big. So definitely something worth considering. For 230 points, 60 rockets, plus the 4 ATGMs, it's okay. It's not the best value, but it is a solid helicopter. Then we have the Mi-8, the AM Tish. This is just by standards an okay helicopter. I mean, it's 140. It comes default with the rockets here, which you can either change to gun pods, S13s, or Cocons. I haven't really tried it with the Cocon loadout, but that could be an interesting one. It really depends how you're going to use the helicopter, because you can't get much supply with it. It's only 3,000 supply. I mean, it's still better than nothing if you need a supply helicopter. But the main thing here is just like bringing in a decent number of men all at once, and then also providing fire support in doing so, whether it be with rockets or with AGGMs. So yeah, it's a pretty decent transport helicopter, especially with the 15% ECM, certainly helps out. Still got 15 health, got some 10 armor in there. Outer pylons, you can actually add 4 air-to-air missiles, and you can also get more Cocons. So I'd be interested to see how it would work if you ran it with 8 Cocons like this for 150 points. It's actually not too bad in terms of price for a 15% ECM aircraft. I've never tried it in this loadout, but now I'm curious to do so. The most of the time I either run it with like 1 or 2 sets of rockets, so my recommended, generally speaking, would be either just the 40 rocket standard loadout or with the extra rockets there, so you have 80 rockets for 165 points, but then it becomes a little bit expensive for a transport helicopter. Then we have the Mi-8 MTV Zeleny. This is much better as a transport just because it can carry more supply. It has the same number of seats. 10% ECM instead of 15%, which is why that Mi-8 costs a little bit more. You can add rockets on this, and then it becomes a cheaper variant, basically. You can see here, this is an extra 10 points for 5% ECM, basically, and less capacity for cargo. And then this one is 10 points less for more capacity of cargo and 5% less ECM. I like this helicopter as an option, honestly, and adding some rocket pods on it is generally a good idea, just so that you can hit any units that end up in range. You can run it with rocket pods and S8s pretty cheap, actually. So yeah, also 80 rocket pod loadout is kind of nice. It just depends, again, how you're going to use it. Most of the time I run it with rocket pods just so I can hit something if I see like a target that's weak and on its own, just to clean it up. Right, moving on to motorized infantry, we have the Mi-24K, which is a very solid helicopter. It does have the ability to laze, which is interesting. So it does overall have like worse optics than something like the Mi-28 or the Alligator. You know, you're down to 2,000 optics and only 2,500 meter low altitude range, but it's still enough to use as sort of like a throwaway recon helicopter. And that's kind of the role that I put it in most of the time. You can either run it with the default like Yak plus S8 rockets, or you can change it so that you have more rockets on the side. You can actually make it completely empty as well for 90 points and just use it as a helicopter that lasers targets. Now, I have never really tried this. Again, I love going through these videos because whilst I have a lot of anecdotes on using certain units, when I look at these loadouts, I've never really spent this much time in the armory. So yeah, now I'm thinking, what could I do with this Mi-24? Because it's a helicopter, you always have like an elevated line of sight, so the laser's very, very good. Okay, yeah, so glorified laser unit, I guess, if you want, but I like using it personally as a 80 rocket helicopter that flies around the corner of the map and uses its optics to spot units on the ground and kill them. So, you know, backline AA units and also artillery. Obviously, AA units that can't shoot helicopters, like enemy Patriots and stuff like that. Otherwise, yeah, not much ECM, but still relatively tanky. Moving on to the Mi-24P Phantom. Again, we're back to the 30 on the front here with the 1,000 meter range. You got those 40 rockets by default. You got 5% ECM, 15 health, and 20 armor with 8 capacity in this one. The Mi-24K unfortunately doesn't have the ability to carry any dudes because it has its like optics inside there. You can see in the windows, like an optics system, whereas the Mi-24 doesn't have that. I guess that's maybe the laser, actually, the laser system. Yeah, so this actually still has the ability to carry soldiers anyway, the Phantom. And yeah, It's another helicopter that I think generally works as a nice rocket helicopter, just for supporting, or in my tactical outplay deck I have basically loads of rocket helicopters that I just throw at the enemy all at once when there's a little weakness in the AA, and you can just grind through their backline super fast with that many rockets. Like if you add the extra rocket pod, you have 80 rockets. But yeah, by default, 130 point support troop transport, it's okay. You can add Cocons for 25 points. You can add R60s for also 50 points. Now these R60s are basically the same as Iglas. They have like 1 more damage that I think is the difference. Let me just double check this before I tell you for sure. If we compare it to the Igla S, yeah, same guidance, same low altitude range, same high altitude range. It's just the damage going from 7 to 8. Slightly more penetration as well, meaning you're going to do more damage against units with armor. But yeah, either way, solid aircraft, the Phantom. It's nice, just cheap and cheerful as a rocket helicopter. That's what I like it for. This is my favorite loadout. Then we have the Mi-24 VP. This, again, it's very similar. You just got basically a different gun. So yeah, like this front gun is different. Like, so this has the gun where it needs to be facing the right direction. This one can fire in a lot of different directions. You have it standard with the rockets. You've got the 5% ECM, 15 health, 20 armor, and then you can actually change this to have the Yak minigun instead of the autocannon if you want. The Yak, it's okay for killing infantry. It doesn't do that much damage over time because it's only like 1 damage there. It's kind of like the same as a minigun. And then the autocannon is at 1.75, so that's actually quite a big difference for 5 points. So I'd never recommend downgrading it. You can add more rockets to make it 80 rockets. You can add the Cocons, or you can just add even more Cocons and have it as an 8 Cocon HGM helicopter, or like put the rockets on. Most of the time, I don't think Cocon helicopters are worth it. There is also the loadout for the Igla N, but the Igla N has less range, so that's kind of pointless as well. Again, because of Cocons having less range, they put themselves more in danger, and since the aircraft is generally like less tanky than a unit that can protect itself more at longer range, they're never really used for that role. They're always just like for slamming into the enemy rockets. That's what these are for. Then you have the Mi-28N, Ochotnik. This is another helicopter that works really well as both an HGM helicopter and an anti-air helicopter. So you can basically make it exactly the same as the Mi-28NM if you add the radar, which gives it that extra optics. So it goes from 2000 to 2400, you get the 3200 low altitude range. Otherwise you're only at 2500. So if you want to use this as an air-to-air helicopter, I think the radar is important just because it allows you to spot and like Comanches on Silent Hawks easier. Otherwise, if you're just planning to use it as like a support helicopter with anti-air, then that's fine as well. Just like not having that extra 20 points. But either way, by default, you have the S13s or S8s if you want to change to them. And then on this outer pylon, this is where you get the multi-role purpose of this Mi-28. So you can run attackers plus Iglas. You can run just Iglas, which is my recommended loadout. Just Iglas is really good. You get 8 of them, and then it basically works out exactly the same as this helicopter with the Igla loadout. You can see that it's 10 points cheaper. That's just because it doesn't have the radar by default. You do have to pay a little bit more for the radar on this one, so do bear that in mind. Like if you're running VDV Moto, it's always worth using the Mi-28NM over the Mi-28N because of the price difference there for the radar. But yeah, 16 attacker loadout. There is the more rocket loadout and the S13. Now, honestly, the rocket loadout for this for 165 points is pretty good, especially since you have this 30 melt as well, which I don't think I touched on before, but it's okay. It's got 1.5 damage. It's not as much damage. I mean, the HE damage is actually pretty good against infantry. I just find like 30 mil autocannons on helicopters don't really fire effectively enough. Like, they're kind of inaccurate, it seems. I don't know why they just don't do much damage. Like, when we get to the Apache later on, it's a prime example of a weapon that's like woefully underrepresented in this game, and I think it's the same for the 30 mils on the Mi-28. This should absolutely destroy infantry like the ground-based 30 mils do, but it just doesn't for some reason. Either way, it is better than the Apache equivalent. My favorite loadout for the Ochotnik is generally just air-to-air though. I don't think the attack is that good just because it takes a while to fire. You know, it will fire and then, you know, it has to wait and then it fires again. But it is cheap. Like 210 points, 10% ECM, 30 armor and 15 health is pretty good for the amount of HGMs that you can carry on this thing. Then we got the Mi-8 MTV2. This is 125 point helicopter with the ability to carry 4,000 supply, 5% ECM, 15 health. You got the rocket pod by default. You can't change that. Like, you can't remove it, sorry, but you can change it to the gun pod if you want to, just to make the helicopter cheaper. You can also add more rockets, which is sometimes something that I would do, just because having more rockets is nice. And depending on what you're shooting at, quite often 40 rockets might not be enough to kill it, especially if it's like infantry and buildings can be particularly stubborn sometimes. So having the extra rockets to finish them off is always handy. And moving on to the coastal troops, we have the Ka-29. I'm actually a big fan of this helicopter. I think some people think it looks weird, but I just think it's such an impressive thing. Like, this should not fly. When you look at it, you go, how does this fly? But yeah, the twin rotor design is always really cool on these Russian helicopters. Regardless, 5% ECM, 15 health, 10 armor, 16 seats, which is actually a decent amount, and 3,000 supply lift. Comes by default with the machine gun in the front there, which is okay, but it only has 6,600 meter range. It's basically the same as like the minigun on the American side. And then you've got the S8 rockets. In the fuselage, you can add a 30 mil, which is on the side there, so you get a little bit of extra damage. I do like adding the autocannon for 10 points. It can be kind of handy. I think generally I prefer rockets over the gun pods though, unless I'm doing... Actually, I say that. I have set this up in some of my decks where I have the 30 mil and the gun pods, and then you just fly it, like I was saying earlier, with one of the Mi-28s. You fly it at low altitude through buildings, and you just shoot infantry within 900 meters. So you got this 1,000 meter 30 mil firing away, plus the 2 gun pods at 900 meters, and you just blast an infantry and light vehicles to pieces. There's also outer pylons where you can add yourself some more rockets, and you can add Kokons, you can add the attacker. But yeah, you can do like kind of an 80 rocket loadout on this thing if you wanted to. You can do like the gun pod plus rockets, you can do the gun pod plus like a few 80 gems maybe as well. The attacker actually could be kind of an interesting addition if you wanted to have this at low range, because the nice thing about the attacker is it's actually a pretty fast 80 gem, whereas like the max speed on a Kokon's 1010, and then on the attacker it's 1190, which is a big difference over a long sort of area. So yeah, interesting one. Regardless, yeah, I think actually my favorite loadout now I think about it is the autocannon plus the gun pods. That's the one that I have used it as the most. Either that, or you just make it as cheap as possible by just like removing that and using it as a 115 point helicopter / cargo helicopter. I'm moving on to the Katran. The Katran is a fun helicopter because of its cruise missiles. And yes, you heard that right. If you haven't played Broken Arrow, the Katran can fire cruise missiles. 170 points, 30 armor, 15 health, 25% ECM, basically the same stats as the Alligator in terms of tankiness. Default comes with S13 rockets, you get 10 of those. You can change it to the S8 rockets, which you get 40 of. And then the outer pylons is where the fun comes in. So you got the KH-35 cruise missiles, which I think is a fun loadout, but these cruise missiles aren't particularly powerful. Like they are 40 damage, which is, I think, like 20 less than the Iskander or something like that. Regardless, you almost need to double tap everything with these in order to kill it most of the time. They're not really going to do much damage on their own from my experience. Unless you get like a direct hit, in which case, yeah, okay. But you can't laser guide them or anything, so it's kind of very RNG. The Hermes, interesting HGM weapon system. It's a 2,000 meter range HGM, which is longer than the Vickers, right, by 200 meters. So that is quite significant. Its terminal guidance has 1,000 millimeters explosive pen and 11 damage. So it's the same damage, but you're getting more pen and more range. So this HGM system is pretty good. Now it doesn't fire like crazy quick. I believe it just fires one at a time, much like the Lemur or the Attacker. It doesn't like ripple like the Vickers does, but it is pretty strong if it hits the mark, and I have been using it quite a lot more lately. Now there is the 12 Attacker loadout if you want to use that. There's the anti-radiation loadout. This has 3,500 meter range, will target enemy radar, so if there's a lot of enemy SHORADs which have radar turned on, this can be useful against those, but most of the time it's not really going to be used for taking out backline AA, something like enemy packs, because you can't get close enough. You don't really have the range on that. Or you could just run it as a rocket boy for 195 points, but kind of an expensive rocket boy, honestly, as using rockets does put you in a very precarious situation. So you generally, if you're going to go rockets with helicopters, want to make it as cheap as possible. And there you go. So my recommended loadout is either the Hermes or the cruise missiles. I like the Hermes at the moment more than the cruisers, generally speaking, when I'm using coastal. Unless I'm using like a coastal VDV or a coastal moto combination, in which case, you know, you might not use the Catran because you're using other helicopters that do the HGM stuff better, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, MI38 is your last one. It's a pretty big boy, 7,000 supply, carries 30 soldiers, 10% ECM, 18 health. It's okay. For 125 points, it's actually a reasonably sized cargo helicopter. But I don't use it all that often, if I'm honest. Okay, moving on to America. We've got the Super Cobra to start off with. You will notice that in general, the helicopters of the US side are a lot more specialized, but generally like weaker in terms of health and armor. And it starts here with the Super Cobra, where you've only got 12 health and only like 10 armor. Now the thing to note is that generally, I think the Stinger has more damage than the Igla. So the fact you have less health as a US helicopter doesn't make all that much difference in practice. So just bear that in mind. But moving on, we have the Hydra rockets by default on this. You get 38 rockets, and then you get the two towed twos. For 145 points, you don't get very good optics, 10% ECM. You can change the outer pylons here, and that's where things really change up. If you change the Hydra rockets, you're basically just getting less of them, but that's just if you want to make it as cheap as possible, which you might want to do sometimes, depending on what you're putting on the outer pylons. So the outer pylons, they can have the sidearm. This is an anti-radiation missile. It's used for killing SHORAD that uses radar, so things like Pantsirs, Taurus, Tunguskas, that kind of thing. It does require generally 2 of these to hit the mark in order to kill. And that means that, you know, considering those radar-based AA units can shoot down these missiles, they're not very effective. You will need maybe 2 or 3 more likely to kill a SHORAD. And that's a lot of points investment just to try and take out an enemy AA unit using sidearms in this regard. I have used them in the past because the one thing that they are good for is distracting AA. You know, if like AA prioritizes missiles coming towards it if it can target them, and therefore when you're doing big helicopter pushes, having a couple of helicopters with sidearms that distract enemy SHORAD is very nice, particularly against units like Tors and Pansirs, which can kill your helicopters very quickly otherwise. So it gives you time to get in range to blast them to pieces with rockets. So that is the one use of the sidearm. Then you have the Sidewinder. Now the Sidewinder is a very good missile. It's a 2,100 meter range, so in terms of air-to-air engagements, you're always firing first. Then you have the damage of 13, which is very high, meaning these Sidewinders can two-shot basically every helicopter on the Russian side. And Super Cobras are nothing to sleep on. They can even two-shot like aircraft. Just bear in mind, obviously, you're not going to outrange an aircraft with these, generally speaking. Actually, I guess technically you're on the same sort of level playing field for the most part. But yeah, my favorite loadout for this is probably either the whatever Hydra option you want. Sometimes I like them cheaper, sometimes I like them more expensive, and then add the Sidewinder. So this would be like my recommended loadout for these. Use them as anti-air and anti-helicopter loadouts. But yeah, the sidearm one is fun to mess around with for sure. There is other options, of course. You do have the Hellfire missile. The Hellfire is semi-active on this. It is the AGM-114K, so it is not a fire and forget. It is semi-active, which means you need to hold line of sight. The Hellfire can also be laser guided to keep it on target, out of line of sight, I believe. So that's important to note. But yeah, Hellfire is strong. Will two-shot most vehicles on the ground, and 900mm of explosive penetration. You can also add more tow missiles, but they only have 1,600 meter range, so it's kind of like using the same reason that you wouldn't use the Kokon on the MI-24s. The tow doesn't have enough range, so you're just putting yourself in danger and not getting much out of it. There's a standard tow to load out, and then more rockets. So you can run these as like cheap rocket helicopters, but they're not very strong. Which is the reason that you can get away with it a lot on the Russian side, because you have more health generally and more armor. But on the American side, these sort of cheap rocket helicopters don't do as well, even if the 20mm is very good. This thing can do a decent amount of damage over time, and it can also fire in multiple directions, so that will be firing for you quite a lot. Moving from the Super Cobra, we have the Viper. So the Viper 20% ECM does make a big difference here. Same health and armor though. Default loadout comes with 8 Hellfire missiles and guided, or you can change that to guided rockets. It does come with guided rockets by default, so you already have like 38 guided rockets. Guided rockets, they have less dispersion and they have more range, generally speaking, and you can also laze them. So if you're lasing something and all the rockets hit the target like directly, it's absolutely huge. You can really grind through people very fast. It also comes by default with Sidewinders, so it's a very jack of all trades by default. But yeah, you can take off the Hellfires and just make them rockets if you want. You can make these super cheap. Like that's just another like cheap loadout here. So if you want another air-to-air option with Sidewinders, you can do it this way as well. You get that extra ECM there for 25 points. And then on the wings, you can have the side armor or the Sidewinder. I think generally speaking, if I'm using the Viper, I will have like rocket pod with the 38 rockets plus Hellfires. It's kind of like the loadout that I like to use, 235 points. Nice thing about the Viper that a lot of people overlook is it is a pretty nimble aircraft. It doesn't really show it on the stats, like most of these are pretty like similar in terms of like agility, but for some reason I feel like the Viper, I don't know if it's just like, again, me just spewing bullshit, but sometimes I feel like the Viper's just better for being able to get on target with its Hellfires quickly. Like the Apache sometimes just doesn't turn very quickly. Whereas the Viper just like snaps on its target super fast. And moving on, we have the Super Stallion. So we've got the CH-53E here, 14,500 supply capacity, 30 seats, 5% ECM, 18 health. It is a chunky boy, used for bringing in large amounts of troops or supply all at once. You can equip it with miniguns or the Gal-21 heavy machine gun. on the side here. It is only on the left side, so bear that in mind. But yeah, why would you use the Super Stallion when you can use the King Stallion? The King Stallion is nice because it gets guns on both sides, but also because it gets an extra 5% ECM. So yeah, I mean, you could make this 160 points, have both of the Gal 21s on it. You get 16,000 supply capacity instead of 14,500. Same seat number, but more ECM. And I think the King Stallion is just a straight upgrade that you might as well be bringing instead of the Super Stallion for the most part. Then we have the Osprey. The Osprey is a controversial one. It comes by default with a gun on the back, which is kind of funny when you land and there is an enemy unit nearby. You'll see the Osprey like turn around its rear to the enemy and just like blast away at them. Really, really funny. The Osprey is great because it's super fast. Now you'll notice here that honestly the King Stallion and Super Stallion are the King Stallion is pretty fast. 315. That's actually another reason to take the King Stallion over the Super Stallion. Now I noticed that is that the King Stallion is much faster than the Super Stallion, which is a big difference when you're using it for transporting troops. Speaking of speed, yeah, the Osprey 500 speed. This thing is crazy fast as a sort of I don't know, VTOL aircraft. It's not really a helicopter. Yeah, it's 6,500 supply capacity is not fantastic, but it can carry 28 soldiers, and I'd almost never recommend dropping off supply with this thing because it almost always gets spotted and almost always gets arty. The same goes for like the King Stallion, the Chinook, the Mi-38 or the Mi-26. Only drop supplies in your back line. Even then it might still get spotted. So yeah, just bear that in mind. Never drop like supply and infantry at the same time because artillery is going to fall, bombs are going to fall, and that's going to hit the supply, and anything that's nearby you haven't moved yet will die. So yeah, regardless, Osprey has a few uses. I think you can genuinely use the Osprey to keep up momentum on the front line. So if you're playing a very infantry heavy game and you're sort of like slowly pushing forwards with your infantry, but you're having a few units get picked off here and there, then reinforcing them using the Osprey quickly is a very nice way to get like continue momentum in the game because it can resupply and reinforce you super fast. The other thing the Osprey is good for is like flanking maneuvers because it's so fast. You can get right round to the back before anyone can really do anything about it. Just bear in mind that if it does get spotted, it is probably going to get killed because, again, it's so big, it's quite easy to spot, and then all it takes is like an aircraft coming in and strafing it to death. So yeah, it's pretty rough. Generally speaking, in situations where you're taking it to the front, you might want to add the minigun. It's only got 600 meter range though, so it's not really going to help you that much. I don't think it should be 5 or 10 points. It should probably just be 5 points or just come on it by default. You may have also noticed that the MV-22B Osprey has exactly the same stats as the Special Operations Forces CV-22B Osprey, which confused the hell out of me for a moment there, so sorry about that. Let's move on to the Venom. The Venom is a pretty nice troop transport. It's very cheap. It can carry 8 soldiers to the front line or 2,500 supply. And I like these because they're only 65 points and they have 10% ECM, which is pretty good. They can drop lots of little supply dumps all over the place, and whilst I wouldn't usually recommend dropping supply to the front with a helicopter, because this is so cheap and it's dropping small supply dumps, it doesn't make as much of a difference as if you were to like bring in like 10,000 supply with a King Stallion to the front, and then the enemy's obviously going to arty where it lands. Same goes for the Osprey. Whereas the Venom can kind of get away with it, I feel, more often. But yeah, 8 soldiers is good as well, just for like dropping off snipers to the flanks and stuff like that. It's just a very nice, versatile transport helicopter. I probably don't use them enough, honestly, myself. In terms of upgrading to the miniguns, probably unnecessary for 5 points. Like, yes, they aim very quickly and they just keep firing miniguns, but the M240 is decent enough on its own. And the upgrade for rockets, it can be useful. I think the one time I've seen Venoms be really useful with rockets is like a quick reaction force to something in the back line, just because you're not like over investing into loads of points to kill something. You just get like a few rockets on these and then you're good to go. So yeah, I think this would be like the loadout, like Hydra rockets or M240, or just like no rockets would be like my recommendation for the Venom. Very solid transport helicopter. Then we have the Apache. So the Apache is 20 armor, 15 health, 15% ECM. It's just like straight up worse than like the Alligator or the Mi-28, which I think will rub Americans the wrong way. But either way, 20 armor is still decent. You got 15 health. You're going to survive like 3 Igla hits. Or sorry, survive 2 Igla hits, probably die to the third. 15% ECM, yeah, it's okay. The one thing that really lets me down personally about the Apache is its 30mm auto chain gun. This thing just seems to be so lackluster. Like, when you think about an Apache, you think about how this weapon system with the 30mm is just so effective against infantry in real life. But in this game, I just don't feel like it does much damage. Like, it's 2.25 damage on the stat card, but I never feel like I'm doing that much damage with the autocannon. And it always takes ages to aim is the other big thing. Like, it just takes so long to aim with this thing, even though it's got like this really cool weapon system thing going on, and where the guy's like, I don't know. I just feel like this should be more effective. It should be able to aim a lot faster. Like 2 to 3 seconds just seems criminal. Anyway, Hydra rocket loadout by default with 38 Hydra rockets. You've got the guided rocket variant as well. You get that 1,400 meter range with the reduced dispersion. And then there's also the 80. So this is, again, semi-active Hellfires. So you need to maintain line of sight or have allays on target. You can add more Hellfires. You can add more rockets. My favorite loadout for the base Apache is just Hydra rockets. It's a tanky enough helicopter that it can push up close, and you get 76 Hydra rockets, yeah, for 150 points. So it's not only like, it's really good value when you compare it to like some of the other helicopters on the Russian side. I guess technically it's kind of the same as this. For example, like that's 60 rockets actually for 150 points rather than 78 rockets for 150 points. So yeah, I just think this is a really good value rocket helicopter, the Apache, and that's how I would use it. Then we got the longbow, and this is where I would use it for HGMs. So you've got basically the same helicopter. So 20 armor, 15 health, 15% ECM. The longbow, of course, gets the longbow system. So you have the 2,400 optics and 3,200 against enemy aircraft. But the beauty of this is, whilst like you have, again, the rocket loadouts, you have fire and forget Hellfires, which is a huge difference because these are terminal guidance. So whilst these Hellfires have slightly longer range with the semi-active, the Hellfire being fire and forget, a terminal guidance, is really nice because once they get like a certain distance, they will home onto their target themselves, which can be really, really handy just for kind of like floating past enemy vehicles and then pulling away really quickly. So if you're going to use the longbow for, like an Apache or a longbow, use the longbow for Hellfires and use the Apache for rockets. That would be my recommendation. Also, if you have Hellfires on both pylons, like inner and outer pylons, then you get extra rate of fire. Pretty sure that's the case. So just bear that in mind, because they can kind of ripple fire a lot faster that way. Okay, then we have the CH-47 Chinook. By default, pretty tanky transport. You got 18 health, 10% ECM, 32 seats, 12,500 supply. Same rules apply really to the King Stallion and Osprey, where you drop either infantry or supply, never both at the same time, because it leaves you vulnerable to artillery or bombs. In terms of upgrading the guns, you can go from M240 to miniguns or the Gal-21. If you're going to upgrade, go for the Gal-21. Don't go for miniguns. Like, I feel like the 5 points is just a waste for the most part, because you're not increasing the range. Whereas at least like this can fire at 800 meters instead of 600 meters. Yeah, pretty standard supply helicopter. Use it to drop supply in the back line or ferry troops to the front line. Then we have the Kiowa Warrior. Kiowa Warrior is an interesting one. By default, it comes with 20% ECM, which is actually pretty high, but it's very low on health. Still requires 2 Iglas to kill it. By default, it comes with the heavy machine guns, and you can choose what you want on either the port and starboard side of the pylons. So on each side, the options are basically the same. You have the Stinger, the Hellfire, or the Hydra. The Stinger is a 2000 meter range fire and forget Stinger with 8 health, or 8 damage, sorry. The Hellfire is the semi-active version, and then the Hydra rockets are the 1200 meter range rockets. My preferred loadout for this, generally speaking, is double Stinger setup. So you have 4 Stingers and you just use it as a cheap reactionary air-to-air helicopter. Because you have 20% ECM, these can actually fight off more expensive helicopters than them quite well. You can spend 25 points also to upgrade to the optronic system. This is less important on the US side because like having 2400 optics and 3200 low altitude, because none of the Russian helicopters have stealth. So they're all like 1.25, or in the case of the big transports, it's 1. So yeah, something to consider. You don't really need this unless you're going to use it to hunt down infantry on the flanks, which then you'd want to use Hydras with or the Gal-21s to take them out. I have also seen people use these with Hellfires occasionally, but it's just kind of expensive for that role, especially when you think about like how much the killer egg is. Like the killer egg with double Hellfire setup is 95 points, and then this is double Hellfire setup for 120 points. I guess you do have like 20% ECM, and the killer egg has nothing. So yeah, there is that. Regardless, yeah, I think the Stinger loadout is what this was born for. Don't need the optronic system, generally speaking. Moving on, we have the Black Hawk. The Black Hawk's okay. 12 health, 10 armor, 4000 supply. 15% ECM is actually pretty big for 80 points. And then 12 seats as well. Again, use it for dropping supply in the back line or ferrying infantry to the front line. That's kind of the way to use it. And then it can be upgraded with the machine guns. Yeah, depending on what you're using it for, it could be useful to have these machine guns, but most of the time it's not worth the extra points. Okay, moving on to the Special Operations Forces, we have the Killer Egg. Now, the Killer Egg is infamous in Broken Arrow now because it is an incredibly cost-efficient platform. Whilst it doesn't have any flares and it doesn't have any ECM, it is able to carry some pretty nasty weapons. So by default comes with the 2 racks of Hellfires, so you got like 4 Hellfires that you can use. You can set it up for the Stinger loadout. You can obviously mix it as well, so you can have like one type on one side and one type on the other. You can also have the rocket loadout, so either dagger rockets or Hydra rockets. It's funny with the daggers because it looks like it's like going to be too heavy for it to even take off. But yeah, then you've got the 50 miniguns. These things are nutty. So I don't know like really what to recommend here. It's very much a flavor choice. Everybody loves their own style of killer egg, and I think that it's just such a great thing about this particular helicopter. Some people love double Hellfire loadout because it's a very quick way to get Hellfires to the front, and they're very cheap. They stand off at 1900 meter range and can actually get some pretty nasty kills. Stinger loadouts are very popular because it's a 65 point platform with 4 Stingers, so you can overwhelm much more expensive helicopters with them. The rocket loadouts I don't see as often, but then my probably favorite loadout is the dual 50 caliber miniguns. Like, they are just wild. Really, really fun to use. You keep them at low altitude, get them into range, and then just rip. and yeah, 800 meter range on the 50, 600 meter range on this. So you want to be within 600 meter range to get the full effectiveness out of these, which is why you want to see it be at low altitude, work your way around trees or buildings, get into range with those, and just rip enemy with them. They can kill like light armor quite easily as well, because they're technically cluster, so they're hitting like top armor quite frequently, which is nice. They can target infantry, vehicles and helicopters. They can kill helicopters pretty effectively. They're only 35 points. It's just a matter of getting into range, which is the biggest problem because you don't have ECM or flares. So yeah, be careful using them, but very cost efficient otherwise. Then we have the Guardian. So the longbow upgrade again. You're going to the Guardian now. It's very similar in terms of like statistics to the longbow. You've got two, so it's almost exactly the same. It is exactly the same. So 20 armor, 15 health, 2,400 optics, and 15% ECM. The Guardian is slightly faster than the Apache, 275 speed over 265. Yeah, this thing is pretty nasty. So by default, we got the daggers, the jagums, and the stingers. Very expensive loadout. What I used like about this though is we do get the Jagum. So the Jagum is a 2,000 meter range Hellfire basically, with terminal guidance. So you don't need to maintain line of sight after a certain amount of time. It does 15 damage, got 900 mils explosive damage pen. These can kill enemy tanks very quickly. You can of course bring the dagger, which is the 1,400 meter range guided rockets or hydras. And that's the same for both the inner and outer pylons. And on the wingtips, you can choose to bring in the Stinger AA if you want. You only get 4 Stingers for 40 points, which is actually not a bad cost, honestly. Like 4 Stingers for 40 points is better than the Russians get in most cases. I usually pay like 50 for 4 Stingers, for example. So you do get cheaper Stingers. But then you've also got access to the ECM system. And this pushes the ECM from 15 to 25%, which is kind of crazy. So generally, what I would say is like upgrade the ECM and then just have double Jagum and keep it at range. Because the nice thing about the Jagum is it's 2,000 meter range. So you're already like on the cusp of like manpad range. And then the Jagums can, they can do their work, and then you can use the ECM plus the flares to get out of there. Just make sure that if you ever have this shot at, that you rearm the flares. It's one of the biggest things that gets people's helicopters shot down, is people forget that after they've been shot at, most of their flares are gone, and they'll move back forwards to try and take advantage of a situation, and then realize there's no flares left, or don't even realize there's no flares left, and just watch their helicopter get shot down. Resupplying your flares is super important when you're using helicopters that are this expensive. It is very, very pricey. You can of course like reduce the price if you just want to use like 8 of these missiles instead, which might be a recommendation for newer players. But do bear in mind that not having both inner and outer pylon Jagums means it fires slower, much like I was saying with the Hellfires on the longbow. And then we got the Osprey. We basically covered this before. It's the same as the US Marine Corps one. It's useful though for carrying, your special forces to the front. Then we got the MH-47G. So this is just a straight up upgrade for the Chinook. You've got 20 armor instead of 10 armor. You've got more optics. You've got more ECM, but you've got the same capacity. So 12,500 supply, 32 soldiers. Yeah, 20 armor, 18 health, 25% supply. Really solid transport helicopter, honestly, but quite expensive. So on this, I think by default it comes with machine guns and the protection system off, like 150 points. By default, sorry, it comes with the 15% ECM, but you can add the ECM system to get the extra 10%, which I would generally recommend, and this would be sort of my recommended loadout with just the 2 machine guns like that. The miniguns here and the extra machine guns, I don't know if you're ever really going to use them. That's the trouble. It's another situation where it's nice because it's much safer for infantry dropping on the front, but you're only going to want to drop like supply in the back because it's only got one stealth. So it's not a sneaky boy. You can't really sneak this around the edge of the map without getting spotted very easily, even though I have done it with units like the King Stallion and the Korova. But anyway, moving on. We have the Little Bird. Probably the most cost-efficient troop transport in the game. 30 points, 250 speed. Gets your boys to the front line nice and quick. But very weak. It doesn't have ECM, it doesn't have flares. We'll get one shot by enemy short-range aircraft missiles. So, like a Su-57 with like an R-73 will one-shot a Little Bird, but it can survive 2 man-pads. You can put an optronic system on it, but the thing about the Little Bird is whilst it is good for dropping units into the flanks, because it's got 1.75 stealth, you know, it's actually kind of difficult to see at range. The biggest mistake I see people make with the Little Bird is after dropping off a sniper or some sort of infantry on the flank, they fly it over the enemy's backline. Not only this is just a bad idea, because your enemy knows they've been seen, so they're going to move everything afterwards anyway, which is probably going to piss off your friendlies more than it is your enemies, because they're going to all move their stuff, and then your allies are not going to know where to RT stuff. But the other thing about that is it will basically make the enemy look for units on their flanks. So just don't do it. Just don't do it. It is tempting to put the optronic system on this and be like, oh, I'm going to recon their backline. But truth is, yeah, most of the time they're just going to move after they've been spotted, and then they go hunt for the thing that you dropped off. So, yeah, just sell it afterwards, take it home, and that's the best way. Alright, moving on, we have the DAP, which I think by default looks like this. Sorry, I was just messing with some of this stuff before I made the video. The DAP, it is a pretty interesting helicopter. It comes by default with 25% ECM, which is huge. It has the 2 miniguns and then the 30 mils. The 30 mils have 1,000 meter range, and if you get like maybe a minigun on target plus the 2 30 mils, then you can do a decent amount of damage to enemies quite quickly. Like light vehicles and infantry get ripped up by this very fast. It can carry 6 men, so you can use it as a troop dropper as well. But I think a lot of people, they like to use these as air-to-air. So you can put stingers on it, on the outer pylons. You can put extra rockets on the outer pylons, but it's only 14 rockets, so it's not that useful. It might be useful if you want to use this as like a little fire support helicopter. But the Stinger AA is really good on this particular helicopter because you have 25% ECM. So that's the only reason, really, that you would use this over maybe another platform. But I think the Killer Egg with Stingers, or even the Kiowa with Stingers, is always going to kind of override the DAP in an air-to-air role, just because the number of Stingers that you have may not be enough to get the job done sometimes. So the way that I like to use the DAP personally is with rockets. So yeah, just max out the Hydra rockets on it, or like put like daggers and rockets on it. Just use it as like a rocket helicopter for 150 points with 25% ECM. It's pretty good for that. The other way is like Hellfires. Hellfires can be pretty good on this thing. Again, 25% ECM. You can keep it at range to Hellfires. Though the helicopter's pretty safe with 25% ECM, and then you're able to utilize that range. Yeah, there's lots of interesting ways to use the DAP, honestly. And everyone, again, has their kind of own flavor of DAP. I think like autocannon's super fun with extra rockets on the wings. This is another loadout that I like a lot. Just kind of depends what I would need in my deck at the time. Then we have the MH60M SOAR or SAW. This is just an upgraded Black Hawk, really. So you get extra optics. You actually get quite a lot of extra optics. There's 2,000 optics on this thing. I didn't realize it was so high. And then you've got 10% ECM. Same load, same capacity though. So 12 men, 4,000 supply. But yeah, increased optics, increased ECM. And you can choose your weapon of choice. Then we have the Silent Hawk. This is a very unique helicopter. It has 2.5 stealth, which is the highest stealth of any helicopter, other than the Comanche, which also has 2.5 stealth. It has the capacity to carry 12 soldiers. It has 10% ECM, but basically this is just made for insertions on either the side of the map or into the enemy spawn. You can get this around the edge so efficiently. It's ridiculous. You can obviously use this to drop enemies quickly, or sorry, not enemies, allies, or like your soldiers to the front with this, but you're kind of not utilizing its effectiveness. For 80 points, this is an absolute steal for just getting into people's rear line with snipers, with green berets. Green berets are a nice one with Silent Hawks because they have 3 stealth themselves. Snipers, of course, have 3 stealth themselves. Anything with like the same stealth as a Silent Hawk is just really nice to use with the Silent Hawk to get into the enemy's rear. I have also used these to drop like 2 Rangers Moors on the top of the enemy spawn, or like 2 Stinger teams into the Rangers or into the enemy helicopter spawn. Those kind of things are what the Silent Hawk is made for. And the Comanche, another fantastic helicopter because of its stealth. So it's only 12 health, 10 armor, but it does get 10% ECM, which is okay. It's got decent optics by default, 2,000 meters with 2,500 meter low altitude. You can put a radar on it to increase that to 2,400 and 3,200, but most of the time I don't think you need the radar on this thing because none of the enemy helicopters have stealth. So when you're using it in an air-to-air role, it's not going to be needed. The only thing that the optics might help you spot is like enemy snipers on the sides of the map, and maybe like a Su-57 if it's going to dive into you. But either way, by default comes with rockets. You can upgrade these. I guess it's kind of like a side grade because you get less of them, but you can use daggers instead, which have increased range, and you can get 24 of them. So it's either, what is that, 42 Hydra rockets or 24 guided rockets. I would never really recommend mixing rockets. Just keep them the same so they can be used more efficiently. Then you can, of course, put Hellfires or Stingers. So you can put like a 6 Hellfire loadout, a 12 Stinger loadout. 12 Stinger loadout is kind of expensive, but it is very quick. It fires very fast. So the more bays you have of Stingers, the faster it fires. So in this case, like having 3 bays of Stingers is going to like ripple fire super fast against enemy helicopters. It is expensive at 260 points for doing that, and if you get unlucky and just tank a couple hits and you go down, it's kind of rough. So the most of the time I like to run it with maybe some daggers or hydras, with two pods with Stingers. So it's 220 points, a bit more affordable than 260 points. And you have the rockets for like quickly hitting things in the backline. Because the nice thing about the Comanche is most of the time air-to-air helicopter engagements happen on the flanks. And after you've won those engagements, you want to be able to like whip into the enemy's backline and do extra damage there as well. And this 20 on the front of it is very, very effective at that. It's got 1.5 damage, it's got a decent enough pen. It kind of aims very quickly. And then you've got the dagger, which can then, like, again, aims 1 to 2 seconds, can kill things very quickly. So when you're like on a time limit in the back line, having rockets is a faster way to kill things, particularly since most of them are going to be soft targets anyway. So yeah, Comanche super fun. People have their own flavor of them. Some people like to mix Hellfires and stuff into these. So you have like double Stinger Hellfire or something like that, so you can kill a couple units with the Hellfires. But just bear in mind, as soon as this fires, it loses its stealth basically, and people will know it's there. So yeah, I like the Stinger loadout. You can sneak up on enemy helicopters and take them out. And that's your lot for the helicopters. I didn't think that would take so long, but that was wild. I might have missed a few things here and there, but feel free to correct me in the comments or add more information about specific helicopters, anything I might have overlooked. I really do appreciate the comments so much on these videos, as they help everybody learn who comes along to check them out. But that is it from me. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.